I'm having to drink tea to calm myself down from seeing Donald Trump make verbal love to Viktor Orban. And it's so freaking distressing that the one of the main contenders for one of the most important positions in the world is idolizing a dictator wannabe, is idolizing an authoritarian ruler. Just so depressing. Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. This is Ukraine War news update, first part thereof for the 9th of March 2024. I won't be talking about that in this piece. This is the hits and losses and strikes and whatnot. So we're going to go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply. And there are some absolutely phenomenal statistics in some of the categories. 850 personnel lost is a high figure, not as high as we have seen. 6 tanks is lower than we have seen. 25 APVs is above average, but still not as high as we have seen on some days. 53 artillery systems is a massive number. So it's a huge number in that category. 25 APVs is also a bit of a problem for the Russians. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems is a high number for AD systems. 85 vehicles and fuel tanks is the new record in that category. So that, remember, can be all sorts of different stuff. It's unlikely to be fuel tanks at this point in the war. It's more likely to be golf carts, goats, loaves. I mean, these are the names for the sort of vehicles that are used, and we'll talk about them in a second. But basically, light vehicles, SUVs, Bukanka vans, 4-wheel drive vans, stuff like that. Are being hit, 10 a penny at the moment. 10 special pieces of special equipment is also high in that category. So a couple of those categories are huge numbers. Artillery systems. The Russians are still throwing a lot at the Ukrainians. I think that they are desperately trying to take territory before the 17th of March, which is fast approaching. So there's 8 days before the Russian presidential elections, and Putin will want to go to the polls with some big bit of news. He's got Avdiivka, but he's going to want more. And the Ukrainians are under an awful lot of pressure. They are losing troops in some significant numbers, I think, in certain places. But actually, all things considered, my guess is that Russians are losing tremendous numbers, and that includes tremendous numbers of equipment. And you don't believe me, let's look at Andrew Perpetua's loss statistics for the day before, right? And he goes on to say, what else did he say? I generally well, this was interesting. It's not what I wanted. I think he was saying that there are so many. I'm gonna find it. Because I think it's pertinent. But anyway, he says, I generally suspect Russia's offensive was planned to last around 7 months based strictly on their past behaviour and nothing more, which means I expect these levels of losses to go on for another 6 weeks or so, followed by getting back to more normal, like a handful per day. Every day I wake up, this is it, holy F, yesterday was crazy. It can't possibly happen again. And then it does. I actually can't wait for a period of lesser activity so I can sleep more than 4 to 5 hours. Also, it's somewhat amusing that my estimated end of the Russian offensive might line up well with Ukraine getting a ton more ammo. But just looking at Russian behaviour, their winter offensive seemed to last around 7 months. Start in October and end in April seems about right. Now, we are seeing evidence that the Ukrainians are getting more ammunition. It seems like the hellish period that's just gone is possibly going to be sorted out to some degree. And that's especially evident from days like this in terms of the statistics. If you look at that, that is, I don't know, 7-to-1 loss ratio, I'm guessing, just intuitively. That's an absolutely phenomenal amount of visually confirmed Russian losses. These aren't just, oh, I'm plucking these claims out of my posterior. If you go to the original Google Docs sheet, on the right hand side you have the visual confirmation of each of the claims here. Like this is, bona fide evidence of these losses. Right. What have the Ukrainians lost? A MiG-29 has been lost to an unknown cause, destroyed. Don't know anything about that. I have no idea where that's come from, and I probably need to look at the original piece of evidence that. So actually, let's go and do that, because I think that's a huge loss for the Ukrainians. So if we then let's do this live, if we'll, or you know, it's pre-recorded but live for me. Right, let's go to that Telegram loss and see what it is. So the claim here, if we translate that with the browser, according to preliminary data, this is near Pokrovsk, Ukrainian Air Force Base. The MiG-29 fighter was hit by its own Ukrainian air defense. A combat aircraft crashed near the village of Shevchenko in the occupied part of the DPR. So Shevchenko is near Vuhledar, near Pavlivka, just below Vuhledar, in the occupied part of DPR, in a conditionally safe area in the armed forces of Ukraine, while returning to the airbase, probably the airfield near Dnipropetrovsk. Approximate coordinates of the crash are there. It's also reported the pilot was unable to eject and died. So that is very sad news, and a real loss for the Ukrainians there, if they have lost one to their own air defense. We've seen this from the Russians. At least the Russians have claimed it themselves an awful lot. Now, the Russians often claim that they lose planes rather than admitting that the Russians have shot it down. I guess you could argue that's the same thing, but that's a real bad loss, losing a MiG-29, and an even bigger loss losing that pilot. It's a huge thing for the Ukrainians. They've lost an ST-68 UM radar. An Archer has been damaged. That's the second Archer that we know has been damaged. Not sure of how badly damaged that is. You've also got a destroyed multiple launch rocket system, the IRN-70 Vampire, and a couple of other bits. You've got Goat there. Goat is a UAZ truck, Jeep. So it's, the other day I showed you a Jeep that went over a mine and blew up, and people flew off like 20 meters into the air. I didn't show you that, but I told you that's what happened. That was a Goat. So that's the name. It's one of the names. There are many names for it, for that kind of very light Jeep. And you'll find that Andrew will be referring to that a lot on his list, as he does like the Loaf, which is the name for the Bukhanka. Right. Now for the Russian losses, and bear in mind, it's going to be difficult to overcome the loss of that airframe. However, we've got an electronic warfare system, R330 Zhetel. That's a high value loss for the Russians there. 4 pieces of surveillance and comms equipment, recovery vehicle, Brem 1, a boat. We've got a few bits of artillery, and then we have a number of tanks, T-64, 72, 80s. And then just an incredible list of infantry fighting vehicles, where we have mainly BMP-2s and 1s, a few BMP-3, a couple of BTR-82s, more recent ones. So that is a lot of infantry fighting vehicles to be lost, and that is mainly from one piece of footage that they've got hold of, that they got most of that from, as far as I can work out, or a lot of that from. As you can see there, this bit of footage. Actually, I'm on the wrong sheet, aren't I? Oh, I'm on the original sheet. But anyway, most of that came from one bit of footage. And then we come down to the trucks and civilian vehicles. A lot of those lost. And Desert Cross 1000s, they're the golf carts, as well as a 4-wheeler. So I presume that's the Russians, and this was reported by Reporting from Ukraine. The Russians attacked in one place with quad bikes. There are some claims that the Russians, and I said this the other day, I was like, I'm not sure why they're using the golf carts, right? Is it because they're running out of armored personnel vehicles and IFVs to use, and so they're having to use these, or are they using them because they're the right vehicles? Same with the quad bikes. Why are they suddenly using those? Is it to get through minefields? But there are some who are claiming it is directly because they are lacking the correct stuff to use. They're being forced to use that. So that is one of the prevailing theories. I don't know 100%, but just to let you know that's what some people are concluding. But yeah, the MiG-29, bad loss for the Ukrainians, but the loss of Russian equipment is huge. I mean, that's a really bad day at the office. And to add to that, in the Pokrovsk direction, which is basically the Avdiivka area, the equipment loss numbers that are visually confirmed are 792 Russian losses versus 105 Ukrainian losses. Now, actually, the Ukrainian losses have gone up recently due to the fact that they lost a bunch of equipment in retreating out of Avdiivka. And subsequently, they've lost a number of Abrams and Bradleys and all sorts of stuff in trying to defend Avdiivka. It's stabilized. But at that loss level, that is 7.5 to 8 to 1 ratio in Avdiivka alone. Avdiivka has been insanely expensive for the Russians. Now, there are the complaints that the Ukrainians have lost an awful lot of personnel there. But if the Russian personnel losses map their equipment losses, which there should be no reason to think they don't. When the Ukrainians claim, so the general staff sometimes claim, or certain generals, that the Russians have lost 7 to 1 or whatever it is in the Avdiivka area in terms of troop losses, you are justified in believing that because they've lost at least that in terms of equipment. So it's kind of, you have to do some special pleading to try and conclude, to try and justify that they've lost loads more equipment, which is visually confirmed. You can't argue that. It is there. And there's a visual confirmation of this, as according to all the kind of lost data, open source lost data that we can look at. So they've lost that equipment. But if you're saying but they haven't lost that amount of personnel, then, you know, I'm not saying they haven't, but you would need to, the burden of proof is on you to make the justification for that claim. So just the point being that Avdiivka has been exceptionally expensive for Russia. And there's lots of people like Greg will say it's terrible for the Ukrainians. They lost, like he said yesterday, 230 out of a 500 personnel unit that's brand new put together unit. That is terrible. But what you've also got to remember is, as terrible as that is for the Ukrainians, it appears that the Russians have paid a massive cost for being able to do that. So, you know, the big question is, okay, well, where does that take us now? Like, who out of that whole, if we take the whole Avdiivka situation, including the last couple of weeks where it's been much more difficult for the Ukrainians, have we got to a point where actually the whole in the whole holistic evaluation of that, it wasn't worth Russia doing? Like, that's the question. I don't know the answer to that, but that is a question. Was it worth Russia expending all of that, all of those people and all of that equipment for taking that amount of territory? And yes, the Ukrainians have lost badly in terms of personnel particularly, but man, the Russians have had it tough. Right, the open source analysis from Mediazona and BBC Russia have been doing this for a long time now. 47,000 is their latest stats for definitely killed. I don't think this includes LPR and DPR, which is significant. So those are the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republic militias, are basically the army. They've kind of been subsumed into the army to some degree now on a more formal basis. But I don't think it includes them, and I don't know about Wagner. So if it doesn't include Wagner, LPR and DPR, then that's massively significant. Prigozhin admitted like they'd lost 35,000 Wagner or whatever he admitted. So, yeah. But this is also your bare minimum number two. So they have quite tough criteria to justify putting the figures on the database, which is like they have to be announced to be dead. There has to be like death certificates or announced funerals of these people on social media. And it also has to be directly linked to the war. So even if you think that's a person that died in the war, we're not 100% sure. If they don't know that it was connected to the war, they will not include it on their death stats. So this is your absolute benchmark bottom figure of Russian losses. They will have lost some large degree more than this, or at least some degree more than 47,000. So the deaths of nearly 47,000 Russian military personnel in Ukraine since the beginning of the war has been totted up. According to the journalist, they managed to confirm the deaths of 1,555 people over the past 2 weeks. So if you look at that as a percentage of the losses in total, the last 2 weeks have been insanely bad for the Russians. And this goes back to the Avdiivka conversation that we just had. This feeds into it being very difficult for the Russians. They are taking ground at the moment, but what is the cost, and is that cost worth it? One of the highest war death tolls ever, they say. Just a difficult couple of weeks. And then you have, okay, so what I'm going to show you is anecdotal, next couple of bits, but Russian serviceman is glad to be leaving Krinky. So Krinky is on the Dnipro River, and it's a place where I've been saying consistently that the Ukrainians can't really do anything with regard to expanding that bridgehead. They can't get equipment across. It's very difficult, etc., etc., etc. But they are doing an amazing job of attriting Russian personnel and equipment there, and that's been again visually confirmed. It's a visually confirmed lost stats for at least the equipment, right? And also, there's a lot of drones hitting humans in Krinky. And so, because the Ukrainians can't get equipment across, they're not losing equipment. So the ratio in Krinky is massively in favour of the Ukrainians. But it's horrible for those Ukrainians being sent over, and they're not being told this, but essentially they feel they're going on suicide missions because really they're being. My opinion is they're being used as bait. But from a macro positioning, like as horrible as that is for those humans to be used like that, this is war, and you want to win the war. And in Krinky area, the Ukrainians are kind of winning. And here you've got a Russian personnel, serviceman, saying, I'm glad to be leaving Krinky since everyone I know is either dead or wounded. I mean, you know, this is... So, you know, he says, so we're leaving tomorrow. Thank God. Let's go and pop into what he says. Effing sick of them. They're looking for someone. All right, so it's a nightmare, he says. The Ukrainians are bombing non-stop. F's sake, ours do too. But you can't win, us or them, he says. Your head's always up. You only look up. I've looked at the sky you only look up. I've looked at the sky so much what he's trying to say, to translate the translation there, is that you're always looking up because of drones, because of munitions coming down. Just spend your time looking up. If you miss a flash of birds dropping a grenade on you and you're wounded, at least a lot of guys were killed, 28 dead, the rest are wounded. Every single one, he says. Just us who are lightly wounded are here on the 0 line. The rest are in hospitals. Mozdok, Moscow, a lot of cities. So we're leaving tomorrow. So that is life for a Russian in Krinky. Okay, then we have another anecdote, of course, but it builds up a picture, doesn't it? Of our 3 assault groups, only 3 people returned yesterday. Our wounded were not evacuated. Barrier troops, so the people who are shooting at you if you retreat, your own people shooting at you, were set up against us. So there's a lot of talk. The Russians are claiming very explicitly, and we've even seen some caught on drone footage, that the barrier troops do operate and they do shoot you in the back or shoot you in the front if you're retreating. You know, they worked against us. Those who returned from the assaults alive, the commander sent back to the attack without weapons, only with knives. Russian occupiers complained in this video. So this is 155th Guards Naval Infantry Brigade. These are supposedly your elite troops, your Marines from Vladivostok in Russia. Due to a huge number of losses to the Russian army, this brigade is called Black Death. It's an anecdote, but these are Russians claiming that. That is a Russian claiming that. These are genuine videos. Things aren't going well for them in a number of places. But we shouldn't get too buoyed up because, you know, it's not to say things aren't tough for the Ukrainians. Right, the head of moving on to a different topic, and this is airframes. Head of Ukraine's Air Force, Oleshchuk, says they, quote, worked on enemy aircraft at distance of more than 150 kilometers. This caused a bit of a stir yesterday. Now, you know, it's not yet known what's been managed to be hit, but there are claims that they did some activities on Russian planes, did something to Russian planes at the distance of 150 kilometers. And this means that it's unlikely to be Patriot, it's unlikely to be NASAMS, or it's at least some very new variant of that, or something funky's going on, or an S-200 missile that's been adapted. Something's going on if they are indeed able to hit Russian planes at that distance. As said here by Tim White, it's not yet known if they managed to hit the plane. It could be a hyperbole or psyops, but it could also be true and shows Ukraine's increased capabilities. So there are these kind of cryptic claims yesterday. Just yesterday, there was a combat use against the enemy aircraft at a distance of 150 kilometers. As a result, the combat work is checked. According to PS, certain discussions have already begun among the Russian pilots regarding the decisions of their military leadership to send them to one end. Such conversations and possibly sabotage during the execution of tasks by the occupiers will only increase. Right. So there's talk from the Russians. Indeed, ISW has said Russian forces appear to tolerate an increased rate of aviation losses in recent weeks in order to conduct glide bomb strikes in support of ongoing Russian offensive operations in eastern Ukraine. In other words, they know they're losing a bunch. And I talked about this the last week or so, is that you see a change of behavior when Russian planes are claimed to be shot down. So they stop flying and stop dropping those aviation bombs, at least to some degree and sometimes completely. But then soon enough, they start flying them again and saying, okay, we think we're going to be okay. Then they lose some more. They stop flying for a little bit. And then they very quickly afterwards, they start flying them again. And this is the Russian forces being apparently fine with tolerating those losses and keeping on pushing, because I presume Putin said we need this and we need that by March the 17th. So one of the most effective ways the Russians have at the moment of taking land is absolutely obliterating that land with these aviation guided glide bombs. And so the commanders, I'm sure, are just saying, yeah, I know there's a high chance of you getting shot down, but you got to go for it because that's what the boss has said. And this is kind of being borne out by a number of data points here. Alexei Danilov says we cannot talk about certain things taking into account the agreement with our partners, but believe me, planes will continue to fall, and with no less intensity. So the Ukrainians are talking a big game at the moment. Claims of 150 kilometers, claims of 15 planes in the last 2 weeks. And I think we've got the data to at least somewhat support those claims as well. And then behavioural changes and claims from Russians that they are, being sent up even though it's dangerous for them, and ISW analysing that they're prepared to take those losses, and that is going to continue. So good news for the Ukrainians there. Due to the lack of armoured vehicles, this is what I was talking about earlier, the Russians are using ATVs, all-terrain vehicles, so things like quad bikes, golf carts, light trucks for assaults. We call it massive meat assaults, according to Alexander Tarnavsky. So this is not Getty saying this as a random source. This is actually a Ukrainian general saying, due to the lack of armoured vehicles, the Russians are using X, Y, and Z. Exactly what I was talking about earlier. And that, I think, is indicative, reflective of a poor situation the Russians are in. A Ukrainian SSO destroyed a Russian RBZ-330 Zhitel complex. That's an electronic warfare complex. That's a high-value bit of kit, but there is a video evidence of that. I'm not going to show it to you because I'll get restricted, but you get the idea. I'm not going to show you this either, but there's a lot of sniper video footage online, and it's difficult. If you're the sort of person that can watch people just get shot and die, then okay, there's plenty of that for you. This one was interesting because someone gets shot by a Ukrainian sniper at night, and that person explodes. And the idea is that he was carrying a mine, actually a sapper laying mines, and he was shot. And yeah, that man is definitely not alive anymore. It's quite incredible to see. Yeah, just a sniper shot and an explosion. Right. Now, on the other hand, what the Russians are doing very well at the moment. Two things. One is aviation strikes, and we're going to look at what Andrew Perpetua's live stream talked about with regard to that. And they are continuing, even though the Russians have supposedly taken some major hits in air losses. But also, multiple launch rocket systems are being used, not GIMLRS, but MLRS. So those ones that just fire off barrages of fairly inaccurate missiles, but they work to really suppress areas, and they spread over quite large areas. And this is what Andrew was talking about in his live stream, is the radius of these strike areas.
We've been mapping a lot of MRL strikes recently, and I really like to map the entire extent of the strike because I think it's interesting to have on the map. And I don't know if Gick likes it. But I like it. I
think what he's saying here is those 5 dots aren't 5 different cases of MLRS, I think, but that's literally the whole stretch of the MLRS blast radius, if you like.
The full thing there, so we could see like where they hit. Just like, because we could easily have mapped this as one dot and just said there's MRL here, right? We could have put a dot like right there or something. But we didn't. We like mapped the whole extent of the strike, and I just think that's interesting. And there's been a lot lately, and
so that could have been just one strike that could have been one strike, and those are all that. It just goes to show that if you fire off a volley of where all those rockets go, and they aren't the most accurate, but then if you like, right, the Ukrainians are generally there, they've got a bunch of tree lines or a bunch of trench lines there. Let's just absolutely hammer them with these rockets. Then
Of
can be effective.
like the how devastating MRL can be. There's been a few larger strikes. Well, this is a MRL strike too, so this one is a little bit different.
And that's in an
that
urban environment.
First, there was a string of rockets that kind of went across the town, and then they followed up that with a bunch of cluster munitions on the northern part of the town, which was interesting. And you can click the video and kind of, I guess I can show this. Should I show it?
If you want, it's super boring. I mean,
Well, anyways, I just find it interesting, the MRLs.
Yeah.
And
yeah, today I did another one. I just don't remember where I even geolocated them.
yeah,
I want to show you just to,
like,
to show you the
Oh,
sheer
that's the flip
volume.
guy,
Yeah,
So-
there you go.
I just think it's interesting having the full extent of the strike. So when you like zoom out, you can see how big an MRL strike really is. Especially like when you like zoom out, you're like, wow, it's like a lot of area hit by a single artillery piece simultaneously. That's the way I kind of think of it, and I just think it's something to bring attention to. So I made that.
I love the work of Andrew Perpetua anyway. I think he does an absolute incredible service to the open source intelligence community. But it's these little nuggets like this which are just worth just holding on to and going, oh, yeah. Okay, so when an MRS piece gets blown up, that helps out significantly.
The topic of conversation. There's not really much else to say.
Typically,
wanna show
so that
the
weapon really
actual-
is more of an aerial denial.
Yeah, well, can watch this. Like none of these like show injury or anything like that because it's just shooting rockets into grass and trees occasionally.
That's what I wanted to show you. I mean, just the number of those rockets
Yeah.
going off. Just when you look at the, loading up into that, how many holes there are. Those rockets are going off one after the other. Bang, 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 bang.
Show injury or anything like that because it's just
All of those.
just
just gone-
shooting rockets into grass and trees occasionally.
That's just one volley.
Yeah.
Now imagine having like 3 MLRS fairly near each other, all loaded and all going off at once. The kind of the dangerous barrage you can have with that. Right, the next bit I want to show you from Andrew's video, it concerns aviation. So I'm just going to play you a couple of minutes of Andrew talking about aviation strikes and how they are using them both against cities, like towns and cities and urban areas, to absolutely destroy buildings. But also the Russians are doing a very good job of using these against fortifications, so tree lines, trench lines, and these bombs are significant. And even if they don't do a direct hit on a trench, actually there are underground trenches that come off that, or underground tunnels that you're maybe not aware of. These will be causing massive amounts of damage. And these are significant explosions, and apparently they are happening with increased precision. So the Russians have improved, like earlier on, aviation supposed precision guided munitions, these carb bombs and whatnot were somewhat inaccurate. But over the course of the war, they appear to have improved their accuracy, the Russians. So just check this out. Look at that. So you've got a trench line there in a tree line, it seems, and 4 bombs are hitting along that line exactly. Those aren't just scattered around. That is bang, 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 all at the same time, and all causing damage to Ukrainian fortifications. These are causing significant damage. Aviation is like the single biggest issue. So then we're going to rewind to what Oleschuk was saying, which is like, we are going to be hitting aviation with the same kind of intensity. They are going to be going down. We've been hitting them 150 kilometers. Whether they are or not, I don't know. But the claim is they are. And my goodness, if they can, then that's great, because you can bet your bottom dollar the single biggest, well, there are 2 biggest issues for the Ukrainians at the moment. Lack of artillery ammunition. That is now filtering through. All the claims coming out from various sources are ammunition is starting to hit the front lines. Brilliant. Second thing is, you've got to stop the aviation. What are you doing about aviation? So it appears that they've been working bloody hard to not only get air defenses to the front line, but also to change air defense capabilities such that they can hit further back. They've been doing some technological tinkering to stop this from happening.
These airstrikes hitting pretty much exactly the middle of a defensive trench system.
That looks super accurate. No doubt about that.
Do you want to talk about this kick? Because
no, it's been frustrating me because sometimes you see those FABs just landing somewhere randomly, but recently we have seen quite a bunch of those strikes really accurately. There was one in Chasif Yar, which is and on Discord in our dooming channel, I did post the comparison image of how this looks like from the top, and you will see that both areas are trench systems. So this is a horrible strike because also you, of course you can dig in, right? But a lot of what you dug will not suffice against the FAB falling on top of you.
I think this video, I don't know if you saw this video, but it's the same airstrike. You can
with the other one visible.
Yeah, it's just from a different angle. So right here, you can see the trenches, right? And there's more trenches there. And you can see this white line is trenches. So, yeah.
And so those are significant explosions. Those the explosive capabilities of those.
This is the same munitions. So you can see the trench line
are significant.
And there's you can see there's more trench there. It's kind of faint.
So they go on to talk about that, and it's well worth listening and watching his video. But these are a massive challenge for the Ukrainians, and they're now being used. So we saw them particularly being used on urban environments. We're now seeing them being used very precisely on Ukrainian defenses. That is a worry. The Russians have done a good job to utilize these as widely as they have. Now, I've just seen this from Lost Armor, which is the Russian kind of version of Oryx. It's the destruction of an S-300 air defense system, launches of the Ukrainian armed forces by a strike of an Iskander. I don't know if this is one of the previous ones we've seen. This is west of Pokrovsk, which is in the Avdiivka direction. Avdiivka direction is where a number of Russian planes have been shot down as they are dropping glide bombs on the Ukrainians. But yeah, that is a couple of units of supposedly of S-300. I can't verify that, but that's an Iskander hitting, which is not a time sensitive, good at hitting time sensitive targets. So they must have been sat there for some time, which is quite usual for air defense systems. They don't shoot and scoot so much as things like HIMARS. But yeah, that's a worry for the Ukrainians if they lost another S-300. But it could be one of the actually quite a few S-300s we've seen recently, just from a different angle, or it might be the same bit for, I don't know. So that's just come out. It's a worry if they've lost another S-300. Right, Ukraine has managed, moving on to distant strikes, managed to shoot down 12 out of 15 Shahed killer drones last night, fired by Russia. So that's, I guess, a fairly good interception rate. That's 3 out of 15, so that's a fifth, so that's 80%. I mean, we've seen better. We've seen up to, well, sometimes 100%. So when there's fewer fired, like 15 fired into Ukraine, missing 3 is going to affect your percentage quite a lot, but actually 20% of 15 is not nearly as bad as 20% of 60. So still 3 got through and 12 would have done some damage somewhere. Hit on an industrial enterprise which caused a fire in Dnipro. Don't know too much about the damage from drones to Ukraine from last night. Hitting residential buildings in Kherson with missiles. This is how Russia rolls. Numerous cases like these have been recorded. Peace can't be discussed with terrorists, period, says Nell reports. Now, as I keep saying, Kherson isn't a place where there are many military personnel. It's basically civilians holding on tenuously to life in a city that was once, you know, a bustling riverside city, and it's now just being hammered by the Russians. And I would argue it is exactly that. It is terrorism. They're doing this to terrorize the people living there. Head of the regional ministry administration, Alexander Prokudin, has posted the consequences of a Russian night attack on Kherson. And yeah, I have stayed in Kherson. That could easily be in the place I was staying at. These are indiscriminate, it appears to me anyway, indiscriminate attacks on civilian. I wouldn't even say targets. They're not, I don't know if they're particularly targeting. They just seem to be lobbing stuff into Kherson in a hope to demoralize the people there and turn it into even more of a ghost town. And then, you know, I don't even if they have designs on taking it back, but it seems to me a case of like, well, if we can't have it, you push us out of Kherson, then you can't have it. And you can't have it because we're going to absolutely hammer it indiscriminately, and so people can't live there anymore. It's just what they're doing to Kherson is heartbreaking, in my opinion. There's been an explosion this morning in Kryvyi Rih. This is a city kind of sort of to the, I guess, northeast of the Zaporizhia reservoir, fairly close to the front. It's Zelensky's home city. No siren was sounding in the city, according to local channels. An explosion happened there. Don't know it might have been a strike from the Russians. It might have just been a random explosion, sabotage or something else. If there are no air raids, who knows? Smoke's rising from the site of the explosion, waiting for official information. So that's just happened as far as I can work out. Right, then we can go on to talk about what Ukraine did last night. And exactly again what I said the other night, which is you are going to start seeing the Ukrainians consistently throw a meaningful amount of drones into Russian airspace. And we've seen it night after night now, and last night was even bigger. So the Russians claimed that 47 drones were shot down. Of course, the Russians claim they shot them all down. That includes 1 in Belgorod, 2 in Kursk, 3 in Volgograd, and then actually it's 41 in Rostov were claimed by the Russians, making a total of 47. I think Tim's just got that slightly wrong. Knowing Russian air defense, it's impossible they hit them all. 1 emergency worker was injured by all accounts. Right, now, they definitely didn't shoot them all down, because there's video evidence of particularly Tagarog, but we'll get there. So first of all, Russian air defenses were activated over the Russian city of Kursk. A number of explosions were heard there. Rocket missile alert has been declared in the Kursk Oblast. As to exactly what happened, don't know, but pretty significant explosion. Whether they shot them down or not, who knows, but the Russians do not tell the truth when it comes to these shoot downs. Russia claims 2 drones were shot down in Belgorod. Earlier, they said 2 people died when a drone attacked the border village of Rojdestvenka. Another person was seriously injured. The video is said to be from just outside the village. Can't speak to any of the accuracy about what the Russians are claiming there. And the video reportedly showing the interception of a Ukrainian attack drone by Russian air defenses in the city of Volgograd. This was actually from yesterday, but this is just quite an incredible bit of footage where you see a missile absolutely, destroyed that drone, of course. You wonder what the value of the missile is compared to the drone. And are the Ukrainians doing to the Russians what the Russians have been doing for a long time to the Ukrainians, which is getting them to exhaust expensive air defense missiles by using low-value attack drones and throwing them into Russian airspace. So the city of Volgograd is located almost 500 kilometers from the front line. And the question, as is stated here, is, quote, one question, how do they reach the suburbs of Volgograd, or where are they launched from? So 500 kilometers to that site. That drone has been undetected and undestroyed, and it gets there, and then the air defenses kick in. And Russia's a vast country, but they will have challenges, more challenges than the Ukrainians going forward, because the Ukrainians, it's still a big country, but it's not as big as Russia, and they can. I think the Ukrainians can better have a complete covered network, air defense network, than the Russians can. The Russians would have to devote an inordinate amount of air defense and radar systems to do that. Now, Russian Telegram channels reporting yesterday a large fire at an oil field at Khanty-Mansisk. This wasn't from last night's attacks, but from the night before. But this came out after I did my video yesterday. So it's worth knowing that, again, the Ukrainians are hitting these oil depots. They are working on the Russian hydrocarbon logistics network and infrastructure. They are, again, using these attack drones effectively. We are starting to see the production levels of these drones be significant and on a par with Russian production levels. And so you are going to see this happening virtually every night. And indeed, last night, crazy night of attacks in Russia by Ukrainian drones, in particular in the Beriev plant where A-50 AWACS, so the A-50 big radar planes, are maintained, and one was apparently caught on radar on satellite at that place 800 meters from there like a couple of weeks ago, and whether it was exactly where the drone hit last night, we don't know. But a couple of weeks ago there was an A-50 there in the environs, and that's where they were striking with these drones last night. So successful attack, it appears, on Taganrog, which is Azov Sea, which is northeast of Crimea, where you've got Berdyansk, Mariupol, then you've got along the coast, you've got Taganrog inside Russia in the Rostov-on-Don Oblast, and then you've got Rostov-on-Don. And Taganrog, very close to the Ukrainian border, and so therefore a very useful place for Russians to supply stuff into Ukraine, occupied territories of Ukraine, and has often been a major target for the Ukrainians. Kursk, Ministry of Murder of the Russian Federation, reports mass drone strike on Rostov, Kursk and Volgograd regions. So there's lots of video footage, lots of CCTV camera footage of explosions going off, at least 47. So when the Russians claim 47 to be shot down, that means there's at least 47. There could have been more, but there's just not too much news coming out. But I would assume there's quite successful strikes on Russian targets there. Aviation plant, the Beriev, is in charge of modernizing A-50 aircraft and maintaining them, I think. 295 and 2142 strategic bombers are also repaired and serviced there. So they're the ones that dropped some of these, cruise missiles and whatnot, ballistic missiles. There are reports that the hangars where the A-50s could be located are on fire. Okay, new Ukrainian drones have larger warheads and fly lower. The Russian air defense struggles. Several good hits in Taganrog, including the metallurgical plant, in addition to the aviation plant in charge of the A-50s, and that's referring to various Russian sources and whatnot. So and Ukrainian sources, I believe. So right, Ukrainian kamikaze drones are bombing the city of Taganrog. There were at least 20 explosions, which lasted for over 30 minutes. The city has many important military targets, including an airbase for Ka-52 attack helicopters and the A-50 aircraft, as mentioned. Then Tim White shows some CCTV footage of a major explosion there. So a slightly better view here. One of the explosions in Taganrog early this morning, the surveillance camera recorded this at 4:37 in the morning. Looks like a big explosion on the ground, confirming Russia is lying again about all drones being intercepted. And there is lots of footage, by the way. I'm not playing it to you because I get in trouble. But anyway, Russians are whining, says Max23, that at night the Taganrog Aviation Scientific and Technical Plant at Beriev was attacked with drones. A-50, A-100DR LV aircraft were modernized there. And again, as mentioned, T-295, and T-142 strategic bombers have repaired and serviced there. So Special Kherson Cat talks about this. So what else can I add to that? A-50 was spotted on the satellite imagery published and on the 28th and 29th. And so now sort of 10 days later, 9 days later, they've struck near to where that was caught on satellite imagery. One of the explosions located was identified to be 900 meters from the last known location in the A-50. That's not to say, I mean, it could well have hit the A-50. The plane has been used and then moved or whatever. And the Ukrainians will have much more updated and better imagery than this 10-day-old piece of satellite imagery. The Taganrog is located 140 kilometers from the front line. So this is what I was saying. So you got Mariupol, Berdyansk, Mariupol, the border into Russia, and then Taganrog and Rostov-on-Don there. Well in range of storm shadows and scout missiles, but as we see, for well-known reasons, the Russians feel quite comfortable to place such important and limiting equipment as the A-50 there. And then moving on, interesting details about the drones that attacked Taganrog in the Russian part of the Special Military Operations Zone last night appeared to be similar to Shaheeds, difficult to intercept, says Dmitry from War Translated. So yeah, I think it was a significant night, and using drones that are more capable and possibly cheaper and more effective than they previously were, and more readily available. So Warhead is much more powerful than previous models. They fly low. Anticipatory discovery is difficult. The flight paths were through the territory of the LPR and DPR, from contact line to Svetlodar, then to Kirovsk, after which they turned south, and then they were being shot down in the Taganrog area. So what the Ukrainians are probably doing is what they will have worked out where air defense isn't. They go through there and then sort of dogleg down to the targets. So, and the Russians do this to the Ukrainians. If you look at the flight paths of Shaheeds and cruise missiles in Ukraine, they often do this thing where they find a path that has the least air defense from what they've worked out, and then they can even circle behind a city and come back in from the back, because that gives them the greatest chance of eventually getting to the target without being shot down previously. And this is what is looking like the Ukrainians have done with their drones attacking Taganrog. Flight time from Kirovsk to Taganrog is 1 hour. The drones in the Novotroitsk region arrived from the direction across the Dnieper, north of Kakhovka. Once again, the drones are much larger in size, sounded similar to the Shahed. The warhead exceeds those previously recorded, speed from 80 to 200 odd kilometers per hour. Flight altitude and a number of areas is 12 to 15 meters. That is just above the ground, which means they're very difficult. Like, radars can't spot them because of the curvature of the Earth and the straight line of the radar. So they'll be going up here. Much easier to spot things high in the sky. That's why planes, if they want to keep safe, and helicopters keep very low to the ground. You keep low to the ground, radars can't spot you, and also things like trees and hills and stuff block radar from seeing you. And so the same is for Shahed type drones. These attack drones, keep them low to the ground, can't shoot them down because you can't see them until too late. Small arms fires are ineffective when trying to shoot them down, is the claim there. So great to see Ukraine using these effectively. Explosion in the city of Taganrog. More analysis here from Status 6. Talking about that same complex and the satellite imagery, and just lots more video. You can see just, as mentioned, repelled a massive drone attack on Taganrog, and that's from the Russian governor there. This is the Ukrainians, I think, upping their drone usage at night. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. The government allocates Ukrainian government 1 billion Ukrainian hryvnias, about $26.16 million, for partial compensation to farmers who buy Ukrainian agricultural machinery. So this is like, yeah, the free market's great, but when you want to, go and buy the cheapest thing or the best thing even, but actually if you buy Ukrainian, it might not be the cheapest, it might not be the best, but actually you'll be supporting, if it does a good enough job to do your farming and it supports local industry, then we'll give you some kickback for doing that. State will compensate 25% of the cost of domestically produced equipment. This is stimulating the Ukrainian economy. According to the Ministry of Economy, the program will double the share of Ukrainian agricultural machinery in the domestic market, and imports will decrease by approximately 10%. And there's no surprise that they're doing that. Border guards, together with the SBU, detained a minibus. Quite incredible footage. I saw them like piling these people out the back of a minibus. 34 people in the cargo compartment. These are people trying to escape from mobilization, it appears. Although I did see a woman on there as well. So anyway, they were being taken to Romania. According to the State Border Service, each of them paid 10,000 euros for the trip. The organizer faces 3 to 9 years of imprisonment. Administrative proceedings have been filed against other detainees. This is a lot of people in this van trying to escape from being called up to war. If Ukrainian ammunition and manpower needs are not met, its battlefield position will continue to worsen before reaching a tipping point, possibly by the summer. This is no time for despair. It's time for urgent action. My latest below and a brief. So this is Dara Masiko, who's a great analyst. Now, I think this is partially being solved as we speak. To create an effective strategy that capitalizes on Russia's weaknesses, Western policymakers and observers need to see the Russian military for what it is, not the hapless, broken, depleted force that many wished it would be by now, but a dangerous organization advancing in Ukraine. Kiev now finds itself in a sustainment crisis similar to what Moscow experienced in August 2022. Unlike Russia, Kiev cannot mobilize its defense industry and quickly scale up production. It must rely on Western military assistance. distance. I mean, it's trying to do that, but its capabilities won't match what Russia has. Ukraine has also a smaller population. I discussed political constraints that Russia has on manpower regeneration and its eroding ammo advantages by 2025 and 2026 if the Western industrial base hits its targets. This will matter very little if Ukraine is not resourced for 2024. Russia is pulling old equipment from strategic reserve to make up for losses and resource newly created units, or as I call it, the last ride of the Soviet army. It won't matter if this equipment is old and less effective if Ukraine is not resourced to destroy it. Ukraine frontline soldiers are in mounting jeopardy not because they lack the will to fight or do not know their enemy's weaknesses, but because of shortfalls in ammunition and manpower. When Ukrainian forces are sufficiently manned, supplied and entrenched, as we're starting to see now, like the last week has been improved for Ukraine. Why? Because they've got ammunition. However, they have shown that they can inflict high costs on Russian forces and frustrate Russia's ability to convert its on-paper advantages into decisive gains. If the West, specifically the United States, does not want to see the front line in Ukraine bend or even worse break, it must urgently approve aid. And if Kyiv wants to sustain its efforts, it faces difficult choices for manpower regeneration. Like we've been saying, we need the aid from the US and the Ukrainians need to mobilize. Put those two things together, things should be all right. Update, with today's satellite images, we can see that the track laying of the new railway connection. So if you remember, I was talking about Rostov-on-Don and Taganrog. There's a railway that they're building from Taganrog through to Mariupol along the coast of the Sea of Azov, right? So here, from right along here, they're doing a railway that will basically go some way to mitigate the Kerch Bridge. If the Kerch Bridge is blown up, they could still supply this southern area with railway in from the south, rather than having to bring railway in through the occupied areas, which ends up going very close to the front lines and gets blown up regularly. This is incredibly important for the Russians, and the Ukrainians, you can rest assured, will be thinking about ways to blow this up. But I assume they're going to wait till it's till it's built and then hit it. Anyway, 80% of it's been completed, so it's near completion. Gap has tightened, but this intersection near Novoselivka, the construction working and track laying is not finished. It seems that the track laying for the new railway connection between occupied Mariupol and Taganrog has begun. Expect the gap to be closed soon. And then lots of analysis on this, different stages of it being completed, but you are going to want to hit not railway, you're going to want to hit bridges. So if this, I don't know the details here, but I assume at some point there's going to be a bridge there. You do not want to hit railways directly because they're too easy to fix. And if you're hitting that with a cruise missile, it's a waste of a cruise missile. Maybe with some of these Shahed drones, if you can cause that damage and keep doing that consistently, then jobs are good. But what you want to do is hit bridges that you can't fix within a couple of days. Railway track is easy to fix, bridges aren't. More laughable claims from Russian state media. They forced the prisoner of war, so Ukrainian prisoner of war, to say that as part of their training, British psychologists, the Russians, and Britain loves this because it actually puts us on a pedestal that we don't really warrant. Russia still thinks Britain is this massive world power in a way that we no longer think that, and they've been doing this through the course of the war and before the war. Thinking these killings of Litvinenko and Skripal and whatnot, although Skripal wasn't killed in the end. But Russia, I think, have this idea of the UK which is overblown. And they love to blame us for stuff. They keep blaming the Royal Navy for like drone usage, Ukrainian drone usage, and for Kerch Bridge stuff. That they look to the Brits quite often to blame us for big things that are happening. And this is what they do here, making a Ukrainian prisoner of war say that as part of their training, British psychologists instilled hatred toward Russian soldiers. And this is obvious nonsense. Why is this nonsense? Because you don't need British psychiatrists, psychologists, to convince Ukrainians to hate Russians. It's just, you don't need to do it. I've been out there. I've spoken to Ukrainians. They do pretty well on their own with hating the Russians without us having to go, oh, do you know what, guys? We're going to train you on how to hate Russians. They'll be like, dude, already done. Please teach us something else other than how to hate Russians. I mean, it's such a ridiculous bit of PR, this. But anyway, it's playing to domestic audience, not to us. As if anyone in Ukraine didn't hate Russia for its attempted genocide, said Tim White. I mean, this is just nonsense. Multi-country prisoner exchange involving Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, which might have secured his release, was under discussion and progressing when he died last month. The exchange involved the involvement of Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich. So Roman Abramovich was getting involved with trying to release Navalny, and then Navalny dies. I just think it makes a lot of sense that Russia really did want him dead. It was a good time to do it before there was a chance that actually he might have been released through some situation arising from these kind of negotiations. Now, this is interesting. Just come out. Valery Zaluzhny, he's just become ambassador for the UK, had been declared unfit for military service by Medical Military Commission before he was appointed ambassador to the UK Ukrainian media. It could be that maybe he wasn't able to continue a military role because of some medical condition. Who knows? I don't know. Or maybe that's just all too convenient. But anyway, that has come out just recently. Sorry it's been a little later today, and there's been so much to talk about. A lot of analysis. It's Saturday. Here it is anyway. Take care. Speak soon.